Cisco is constantly updating, modifying, revising, making changes to Webex Contact Center. And with most cloud applications, I'm noticing that that's common, whether it's Cisco or other providers that provides cloud-based applications. The great news is they're constantly updating. In fact, I've got a attempt at a joke of that here in a moment. And the changes to the queues was one that it took me a little bit to kind of process through. So I thought that might be a good thing to discuss. But then last or 2 weeks ago, they made another change that might call for a separate session at some point in the near future. I'll try to introduce that new change because I think it's very important for us to understand. So our major topics for this morning is changes, just generalize a summary of some of the changes I've noticed to Webex Contact Center. This is not a comprehensive list. This is just some of those changes that I think is a major effect to administrators. Specifically, I wanted to focus on some of the changes to queue configuration. It used to be where we thought of queues as there was two types of queues: longest available agent queues and skills-based routing queues. Now, as I got to looking at it, you can kind of call it 4 different queue types. We'll talk about those different types. And then importantly, how those queue settings affect what we configure in flows. So this is one of my silly quotes. What's the best thing about applications to the cloud? What's the worst thing about the applications to the cloud? The same answer. They're both constantly being updated. So ideally, we need to just keep in mind to plan for change. So first, an overview. Excuse me. So changes to Webex Contact Center. One of the biggest set of changes I've noticed over the last few years with the Webex Contact Center interfaces is that modules are continuing to be deprecated from the traditional contact center management portal. For those who've been working with Webex for some time, you probably started out managing Webex Contact Center through that management portal. And then as the applications are being migrated and consolidated into Control Hub, we've noticed that there's been more and more changes. And this was just an image that I had available that I wanted to point out, is that until April, I think it was April 1st that the change actually invoked, there was up here at the top above provisioning, there was a dashboard. Well, that dashboard is no longer here in Management Portal. It is now the only place I've been able to realistically find it is in the agent supervisor desktop with sufficient permissions. And there was some really good features there. Probably the most important feature is the ability for supervisors to be able to monitor the status of the agents and even sign the agents out when it was appropriate. The provisioning also changed in April. And I'll show you a screenshot of this here in a moment. But at one point in time, when we opened up this provisioning module, there was tools that went all the way down the screen. In April, that became 3 tools because everything had been migrated and ported over to Control Hub. Then in August, there was another change. One of the first things I noticed was that under provisioning here in Contact Center Management Portal, user profile had gone away. And there was one major difference. I'll show you a screenshot of that in here in a moment. But if you looked at user profiles in Management Portal and compared it to user profiles in Control Hub, the one difference is how do we assign the folder permissions to Analyzer? How can we designate that this supervisor has access to this folder full of visualizations, reports, and how do we allow them to see it and not edit or what have you? That was in Management Portal, but it was not in Control Hub. Well, over a couple of months there, throughout the summer, I started noticing that, yes, now that setting was available in Control Hub. Well, not only because of that move, it left Management Portal, Cisco also made a major, in my opinion, a major change to that interface. Now, if you're looking in the modules on the left-hand side, those menu options, you're not going to look for user profiles anymore, right above the contact center users. Instead, you'll look for access. When you open up access, this is going to give you two tabs, one named user profile and one called resource groups. Now, as time permits, I will circle back and give you a little bit of coverage of that, but just wanted to point that out as a change. Resource groups is effectively taking the place of the tab we used to use called access rights. In resource groups, you can define not only which modules, which tools a given user population has access to, but you can also limit that maybe they have access to queues, but only certain queues or certain teams. So resource groups is a combination of features that we're used to seeing in access rights with some of the features that we would see in user profiles. But it allows you to create those groups that you can then assign to other users and determine which, it's basically roles-based access control. You build your resource groups to define a role of which resources a given role has access to, and then you can assign them to the user population, the user profile. So, like I said, I will come back and try to talk about that as we have time towards the end. Because that happened just a couple of weeks ago, I originally wasn't planning to discuss that today. Some other new features, I'm not going to go into any detail on these. We'll have to cover those in other sessions. But several months ago, earlier this year, we started noticing that web chat assets, you would go into Webex Connect and then Webex Engage. And when you would register those assets, you would manage them over in Webex Connect, Webex Engage. You still have to create them in Webex Connect, but now you can see and manage those and configure those here in Control Hub, not just having to go to Webex Engage. Functions. Functions is one of those features that I've been wanting to get my hands on. I just haven't had the time, but it's effectively kind of like building a module or a subflow or a procedure, and you would write functions using either JavaScript or Python that you could actually call from your flows. If you've ever worked with AWS Lambda functions, it strikes me as kind of like that type of logic capability, is a function that you can call to perform a set of logic. I'm not a native speaker in JavaScript or Python. I can usually muddle my way through it with a lot of support from AI tools. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't dug into that too much yet. AI Assistant. AI Assistant, as well as the AI Agents or AI Agent Studio, those are new features that Cisco has been releasing over the last few months to bring in support. AI Assistant is a set of features that's going to assist agents with doing their day-to-day work activities. And then the AI agents, or some people refer to them as AI bots, it used to be Bot Studio in Webex Connect. Now it's referred to as AI Agent Studio. And it's where you can go in and build your bots. One of the, in my opinion, one of the substantial changes there or improvements is that before this change, before this inclusion of AI bots came about in Webex Connect, we only, Webex Connect in conjunction with Webex Contact Center, we only managed bots for the digital channels. It was everything but voice. For voice bots, we needed to go to Google Dialogflow. Google Dialogflow CX, part of the suite of applications of Google CCAI, Contact Center AI. Now we can take care of all of the media channels inside of Webex Connect. If you already have the Google bots that you've configured for working with your Webex Contact Center, nothing to say you have to stop using them. You can still use them. Cisco Webex Contact Center supports both. However, if you're building them from scratch, you may want to try to use it under Webex without having to go to a separate application and learn a separate set of tools. Like I said, those are newer features. I'm not going to spend any more time with it today. We do have other sessions, discussions, classes available to cover those features. There's this, I think the acronym is CWAIE, is a class that covers the AI assistant and AI agents. The big topic, big focus that I was after for today was the changes for queue configurations, which did occur back in April, kind of in conjunction with some of these other changes. Again, just kind of, I probably talked too much in that last slide, but dashboard, one of the big things is that dashboard moved away completely, and that made, I don't know, Renee, we'll have to take that topic offline, and we'll have to see if we can do some research to find that out. I don't know when those plans are due. So dashboard moved away in April. Provisioning greatly reduced. I couldn't find a screenshot of provisioning with all of the features there, but as you can see, as of April, there was only 3 options under provisioning. Well, now, as of about 2 weeks ago, user profiles is no longer under Contact Center Management Portal at all. Now, just as a side note, in class, I was actually teaching a class, and then on Thursday morning, I went to go look at user profiles, and that's when I noticed that things had moved around. And I couldn't find it in Control Hub because it had changed names to Access. The following week, a student in class, we were discussing that, and a student in class looked at his tenant that he uses for production, and it had not updated yet. It was still listed as user profiles. Well, I made a comment, a funny response. I made a comment about it in class, and one of the students said, well, they did say that there was going to be roles-based access control being added this week. And so I'm like, well, okay, I guess that was my update, but I did not interpret it in the same way. I wanted to leave this slide. So I started working this presentation a few weeks ago. And so I pulled this slide in to show where the folders for reporting, when it was in Management Portal, it was under access rights. When it moved to Control Hub, it was not under access rights, it moved under analytics. That's why there was a couple of times I was trying to find this folder. I knew it was here, but I couldn't find it because I kept wanting to look under access rights. It's not really under analytics anymore either. So I just wanted to leave this here just to show you that, to say that was kind of an initial change, initial update, but it moved to other places. And here's what the new interface looks like. You go under Control Hub for Contact Center, and just like we saw before, user profiles was right above Contact Center users. Now that got replaced with access. When you click on access, you have 2 tabs, user profiles and resource collections. Resource collections is essentially access rights. It works a little differently. So I do encourage you, when you first get that, now when your tenant gets converted, I didn't go through and do a line by line analysis, but it did seem to be fairly consistent as far as converting what the configuration was into this new format. However, when I went to go build my own first resource collections, it took me a few minutes to kind of figure out exactly what it is that had changed. And realistically, the big change was when you go under the various options under resource collections, you can actually say these users will have permissions to access team 1, 2, and 3, but not 5 and 6. And so that's one of the things that you manage in resource collections. And then the last step of user profiles, the last tab, you can assign, does this user profile permit access to all resources or limited to this resource collection? And you can have up to 5 resource collections assigned to that user profile. Another thing I had noticed, okay, it's only in early access. Thank you for the clarification. So it's only in early access, which since we have a gold tenant, which is intended for non-production, that could be why we see it, but not others. So yeah, thank you for that clarification. One other comment here is the fact that we used to call a user profile based upon the license type, and we had a profile for administrator, and then we had a separate user profile for administrator only. Now, under the new format, the administrator is now referred to as licensed administrator, and the administrator only profiles are referred to as unlicensed administrator. So just if you see that, that's a kind of a unique difference. Okay. Changes to the queue configuration, the primary reason why we put this together. You're welcome. Okay, so change the queue configuration. As I was putting this presentation together, one of the things I kept thinking in the back of my mind is I probably should stress this. So I went back in. One of the last things I did was I went back in and put this statement. What is the purpose of queues in Webex Contact Center? The official definition is it's a virtual container for calls. And that's kind of where that definition lies. However, I like to think of it as it's a virtual container for holding our calls, waiting for the agent, but it's also a way for us to designate the pool of agents. I sometimes like to use the term candidate agents, the agents who are candidates to handle this call. So in my mind, the purpose of the queue is more about which agents do we want to handle the contacts that goes into this queue. Also, keep in mind that most, not all, but a lot of the settings in the queue, once you set those settings, you can't change it. Yeah, you could do a save as, create a new version, create a new copy of it, and take it from there, but it's not something that you're going to be able to, oh, I didn't want that to be longest available agent. If you've already saved it, just plan to do a copy and start over. So, because you can't reuse that, or you can't modify that. One of the things I've gotten to the point where I like to leverage here. Apologize, let me update my annotation tool here. One of the things I always like to leverage is some of these tools. Like when I go and look at a list of queues, it will actually show us, channel type, that's important, but which queues have skills-based routing invoked, and which queues has agent assignment, or how are the agents being assigned. And this is where I've come up with my designation or my statement that there are now 4 queue types. Because when you set up skills-based routing, you can say, no skills-based routing, which if you've worked with Webex Contact Center, you know that means longest available agent. Or yes, skills-based routing means it is we call it SBR. We like acronyms, probably way too much to represent a skills-based routing queue. If you're using LAA, you can assign agents to that queue either directly by using a direct named list of agents. Talk more about that in a moment. Or you can use the call distribution groups. Now, I've been working with contact centers for a long time. I first started working with contact centers back in 2000 and have been doing various things. I've worked with contact centers from a 3-person help desk all the way up to outsourcers that have 60 to 80,000 full-time employees. When I think of contact centers, I think more in that larger realm. And therefore, I'm going to be more inclined to think in terms of I want to assign groups of agents to queues. So I might be more inclined to use the teams. However, I do recognize that there are some situations where it makes more sense rather than trying to group agents into teams, just assign them directly to those queues. So we have both of those as an option. And again, what are we doing with the agent assignment? We're saying, how are we going to define which agents are candidate agents that goes into a pool to handle contacts delivered to this queue? And the skills-based routing, if we say no, it's going to be LAA. All we're doing is saying, if we have one agent available, no problem, send it to that agent. But if we have more than one agent available, how are we going to pick which one of those agents is going to get the call? Who's been available the longest? Okay, there you go. There's the winner. In the shortest based routing, or sorry, my routing background, my network routing background just popped out right there. In skills-based routing, we can assign them based upon teams or by skill requirements. Skill requirements is one of the ones that took me the longest to kind of figure out. And honestly, it's my least favorite. And I'll show you why. But we'll go through and talk about all four of these options and how they play out. Again, with longest available agent settings, we can assign them by teams, or we can define a list of agents. When we define a list of agents, we create an ordered list, and then we can choose. Do we want to go through that list circular? Do we want to go first, second, third, fourth, fifth, back to first? Do we want to always do top down? If the top agent in the list is available, they always get the call. If you're the fifth agent in the list and the first four agents between the first four agents, one of them tends to be available, top down, you're never going to get the call. And then, of course, longest available is using that more classic traditional contact center routing algorithm. The skills-based routing settings allows us to do two options. Assign the skills in the queue itself, which is what this fourth option is, skill requirements, or if you've been working with Webex Contact Center for some time, then you're accustomed to assigning the skills in the flow. Again, so I kind of broke that up into four sections. So when you're configuring the queues, if you're using longest available agent and you want it to be team-based, then under skills-based routing, you leave that toggle turned off to leave it as longest available agent. You select teams, and then you go set up your call distribution groups, just like we always did. Because there's really no change in call distribution group, I didn't want to spend a lot of time with that, but it's the same idea. You can create multiple groups, and you can define for group one, they're the first group of agents is going to get the call. But if there's nobody available out of that group based upon their team membership, then we wait 60 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 minutes, whatever the length of time is, and then we expand the pool. So these call distribution groups gives us the ability to create a pool of agents and then expand the pool, getting larger and larger. Well, what allows us to get larger? Time. It's a time decision that's increasing the size of the pool. Time decision and team membership. If we want to use this longest available agent based, then we leave the toggle turned off. And up here we select agents. And here's where we can pick. Do we want circular, top down, or longest available? And we go in and we select which agents and we make them a member of the queue. And so how are we defining our pool of agents? We're explicitly listing our pool of agents within the queue. Doesn't matter what team they're a member of, they're a member of the queue. And then how do we pick which is the best agent for this call, for this queue? Well, we use either circular. We just go round and round and round, or top down. If the first agent is always available, they're going to get the call. If they're not available, then the second agent, and so on. And long as available, again, if whoever is available or whoever has been available the longest, they're the ones going to get the call. I can envision certain business cases where maybe you got a queue that needs to go to a specialist team, and that specialist team, other than being that kind of a specialist, they really don't have any other type of settings that we can see grouping them with other agents. So maybe we just allocate them because of their specialist capability, not because they're a part of a different group. And again, the purpose of a queue is it's a container for calls, but also define which agents we would like to handle those calls. So here we're just generically making them a group. With the agent based, we're explicitly listing out the agents. In a large contact center, I might be more inclined to a team based, because the team membership is all I have to do. Because large contact center, agents come and go. Agents move around, they do different things. Rather than me having to go in and edit this queue on an ongoing basis, like I might have to do with an agent based, with team based, all I have to do is manage the agent membership to the teams. With skills based routing, we can assign it in the queue and we can assign it in the flow. If we assign the skill in the queue, kind of two things about this. To enable to toggle on skills-based routing, it's that toggle that we turn to the right, or toggle to the right to turn it on. If we're using skills-based assignment and we assign skills to the queue, then our agent assignment option is skills requirements. We can still select a routing pattern based on who's available the longest, or who has the best collection of skills. So it adds up all the proficiencies and uses that to determine who is the best candidate agent to handle this call based upon who's available. Now, here's where it gets interesting, in my opinion, is the skill requirements. Now, you can add skill requirements, and I'll show you the screenshots here in a few moments. But what you're doing is, when you add the skill requirements, it feels kind of like you're building a skill profile. You're defining a collection of skills that the agents has to have in order to process this queue. But in some initial testing I ran into, I got some interesting behavior. And so this one thing is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to cover this topic. When you do your skill requirements, you'll want to do a view assigned agents to see which agents match, which agents fall under this pool. I will tell you that if it was me, this is probably, based upon everything else available in Webex Contact Center, this is probably the last one the last option I would pick, just because, in my opinion, it's going to be one of the more limiting sets of features. I'm not telling you not to use it. I'm just telling you my personal feeling on it. And it's because it's so different than what I'm accustomed to. It would be a challenge for me to kind of conceptualize how to deploy it in a large scale deployment. But at the same time, like I was saying earlier, where we assign agents directly to the queue, we saw in the previous slide, there I could see where there's some specialty skills where we would want to route calls to only the agents that have that specialty skills. So we could potentially use it in that environment. Probably one of my favorite And when I first started working with Webex Contact Center, longest available agent was my favorite because it was pretty straightforward. It was like a classic skill group routing where we define a group of agents, put them in a team, and then we build the distribution groups to say, use this team first, or use these teams first. And then after a period of time, use these teams. So it was the easiest to think about, to understand, and it was the most straightforward. Then when I started really understanding the skills-based routing, where you can assign the skills in the flow, it's quietly becoming one of my favorites because once I enable skills-based routing, I turn the toggle on, it now gives me this option of skill assignment type. Now, if you had built a skills-based routing queue before April of 2025, March of 2025 or previous, you were building assigned skills and flows. So that was always the default behavior. This assigned skills to the queue is kind of the new feature, the new behavior that became available. When you assign the skills in the flow, your agent assignment is based on team membership. Okay. And our patterns. If we have multiple available agents, how do we pick them? Well, do we pick the longest available or do we pick the best available? Same thing as before. Now, call distribution groups is one of the areas that I think gets to be interesting because, yes, when you build your call distribution groups, you can say, use group 1, wait 60 seconds, add group 2, wait for 3 minutes, add group 3, and so on and so forth. However, in my opinion, I've seen cases where that creates some confusion, where when we start actually, based upon how we assign these settings in the flow, I've seen confusion where people start saying, well, my skill relaxation said we should start getting those agents after 30 seconds. We go look at the distribution groups and you don't add those teams for 60 seconds. So in my opinion, if you're using this SBR assigned in flow, I would be inclined to create one group and put all teams in that group and let my skill relaxation statements in the flow define that time decision. And that's just my opinion. I'm not going to say it's the only option. It's just how I consider treatment there. So now, how does those settings affect flows? I'm sorry, I kind of missed that question. Let me go back and find it. So for SBR assign and flow, you have to use advanced queue info node for well, we'll have to go look at that, Brandy. That's an interesting point about the expected wait time. And I can see why the expected wait time would be an issue, kind of along the lines of variable. So may have to take that offline. So most of you probably know this by heart, maybe even better than I do, but I thought it might be good to do a quick review. And customer call comes in, it matches to a channel, which I still like to think of it as an entry point. I like that terminology, partially because I used to work with enterprise chat and email, and entry point was a very common terminology we used there to define how the customer's channel request entered into the contact center. So we match the number to the channel entry point, which maps us to a flow. Yes, you could still use routing strategies, but that's kind of phasing out somewhat. Instead of using routing strategies, if you needed to use time-based decisions, you'd probably build a business hours object and place that in your flow. Your flow, but the big key is the entry point points to the flow. The flow goes through. I always like to point out that the first part of the flow is any of our IVR functionality, our prompt and collect. Once we go through those steps, we then go to a queue. Now, one of the challenges here is that the way Webex Contact Center is designed, it really intends for us to only have one queue, not, I've spent a lot of time with Contact Center Enterprise with CCE. And in that platform, in our routing scripts, we would have go to this queue, and then after a period of time, we would add this queue, and so on and so forth. We don't really do that here. We try to have everything self-contained within that queue. Well, what's the queue? The queue is some way to either have a list of teams or either directly or indirectly list our agents to determine which agent to handle this call. Now, here's a sample flow that I put together. I only pulled a portion of this flow just because I've been experimenting with a bunch of other things in this flow, such as retry counters for some of the IVR prompts. One thing I do want to point out is that if you notice here, this is that longest available agent based upon team. Here's the longest available agent based upon agents. Here's the skills-based routing where we use the flow and therefore we designate teams within the queue. And then here's the skills-based routing where we are using skills to determine which agents belong in the queue. So these first three is the traditional three contexts that we've used where we come into some play music activity, and then we loop around that activity. And then yes, I know the event flows are sitting out there, but I get a little nervous relying on that. Plus, I may want to have custom, like I have a tendency where if it's coming out of a failure condition, once I put the contact in queue, I want to do some other things. Like maybe I give my disconnect or whatever my message is here, whatever my activity is here. I like to put something in the name to say where it was. If it was in the IVR portion and we get an error and I eventually lead to a disconnect or inflow or what have you, I'll give it a name such as disconnect in IVR. That way, when I'm testing and looking at the debugs, I know, oh, okay, I don't have to go dig through everything. I can see pretty quickly. So this is why I like to go ahead and handle my failures inside of my main flow, just knowing that I do have the event flows back there to handle letting the on-global error handler take care of anything I missed. But this one is kind of interesting and oddball, and I still feel a little off kilter using this. Using this the skills-based queue, using the skills-based routing, we go to music, but then I've noticed that what's going to allow me, if I built that queue and there's no agents that are properly assigned to that queue, then how are we ever going to get calls to an agent? So because of that, in some test calls I've done, unless I start going back behind the scenes and reconfiguring agents, those calls get stuck. So yes, you probably won't put a disconnect contact at the end of that logic channel, but I just wanted to call this out to say, and I'll show you some more about this in a few moments. I just wanted to call it out to say it's going to behave a little bit differently than what you're expecting. So you may have to have some other logic in play here to handle that circumstance. So building our flows. Flow configuration, where we're using longest available agent, team-based. Very straightforward. We're toggled for longest available agent. We're selecting teams. and we go in and we have a call distribution group, one or more groups that we want to have a list of teams. When we build that in the flow, the contact queue contact activity, a lot of words there. I go specify the name of the queue. I can change contact priority. I can check agent availability. Now, if you recall, check agent availability says if I've got distribution group 1 and distribution group 2, and I say, here's a list of teams, and here's a list of teams in group 2, but I want to wait for 300 seconds, 5 minutes, before I go to distribution group 2, check availability. If there's no agents at all even logged in to distribution group 1, just go ahead and drop down to distribution group 2. And so that's one of those things. In fact, in the admin class, that's one of the steps in the lab to help everybody understand how that logic works. Now, you could turn that check agent availability into a variable and maybe use some logic to determine when you want to check agent availability versus not, when you want to turn it on or off. I'm not going to talk about the static queue or variable queue names here. I'll come back to that in a few moments. So just wanted to point out that whenever you're using the longest available agent team-based assignment, there's not a lot that we can do in the queue in the flow. We specify our queue, define whether or not we want to set priorities, check for agent availability, and that's about it. And now the only thing left to do is to play queue treatment, wait for, give the caller audio trying to find an agent. If we use longest available agent, agent-based, so again, the toggle is off, selected agents, we've selected some quantity of agents, and we're picking some algorithm for how we want to select. When we look over here at the queue for that, the queue activity for that queue, it's a little different, but not much. We lose the ability to check for agent availability, which makes sense because we don't have groups or some kind of time delay. It's just a group of agents, just a list of agents. So again, fairly straightforward, not a lot of effects here in the flow, relatively speaking, but we do want to make sure that whatever group of agents we have here, someone's going to be there. So this is a case where you might, in your routing logic, in your flow logic, do things like a time decision. If it's a time frame that this group of agents, no one is in the contact center, especially unless you're a 24-hour contact center and you have a distribution of agents scheduled across the day, you may want to check a time value to see if there's any of these agents even logged on. Or maybe use some other type like the advanced queue info, possibly even the set queue info or get queue info to see if we have any agents, any of these agents even logged on. Because if there's not logged on, doesn't do us a lot of good, put them into the queue unless the customers are willing to wait for hours until an agent becomes logged on and then available. This shortest or skills-based routing assigned in flow, this is the one that I'm most familiar with. I've gotten to where I really like this capability because when we assign the skills-based routing, we're assigning it in the flow. All I'm doing here is defining a list of agents. How am I defining that list of agents? Based on team membership. And here, I won't even be inclined to build multiple call distribution groups. I'm likely to put everybody in one call distribution group. Because whenever I get over here to the flow, what am I doing? I'm saying, here's a list of agents based upon their team membership. I can still check agent availability, etc. But which agents do I want to handle this call? Well, this is where we come into the skill requirements. And this is the one that we've been using for quite some time, where we have some requirements and say we only want the agents who have sales true. This is one of those skills that I've played around with where we use the enumerated skill, where I've got this skill can be either new or established, for meaning established customers. And support, they have to have a high level of support. And so out of that queue, I could have 100 agents, members of teams within that queue, but only the 10 agents that meet this collection of skills would be candidates for this call, until we start relaxing the skills. Once we start relaxing the skills, now after some time frame, we start moving skills out. Now, the screenshots got to be a little challenging to show. I eventually get it to where none of these skills are part of the requirements, but we do slowly reduce some of these skill requirements as we go through the list. One of the caveats is that I can, in the skill relaxation steps, I cannot add a skill necessarily that's not in my initial requirement. One other caveat that's probably worth pointing out. This one statement can create some confusion. Add up to 10 skill requirements that can be assigned to contacts. Contacts? I thought we were trying to assign a call to an agent. Well, yeah, but we've already assigned these skills to agents. We assigned these skills to agents somewhere else. We're assigning the skill requirement to the contact, and we have to find an agent that meets that requirement. That's all we're doing. And that's why there's a setting now in the queue that on some type of blind transfer, or if you do a go to another entry point, you could take the skill requirements off of the contact. But unless you purposefully take these skills off of the contact, this contact is going to require these skills. So that's just one other thing to take into account. Looking at the time here. If you assign skills-based routing where we assign it to the queue, again, we are using the skill requirements, but we have to define which skill requirements meet it. Now, to me, I'm still trying to figure out where the big benefit is, because over in the flow, all I'm doing, I'm assigning the queue. I can't change anything over here in the queue. It's just a queue. And I'm letting my skill requirement definition over here help me determine how to allocate the agents. Now, we'll come back to that here in a moment. Just wanted to kind of point that out. Since we're here, a quick side note. See. So I think, Brandy, you're talking about this one. So Acme 99 can only answer it in the first 60 seconds. Okay. So what we're saying here is, in the first 60 seconds, an agent to answer the call has to have sales true, customer 99 established, and support greater 10 or greater. Actually, now that you mention it, I probably should have made that a little bit lower. I was just trying to keep this be a very selective group of agents that could meet this requirement, and I wanted to manage it. So yeah, that I see what you're saying. That's probably not going to have many agents meet all three of these. But then in the first relaxation after 60 seconds, we're reducing. So now the agent could be for established customers or new customers, was the intent there. And now their support, they still have to have a support skill, but the support skill can be 3 or greater. And then the skill relaxation step 2, after an additional 60 seconds, all they need to do is have sales experience. And then when we get to the 3rd step, it's nothing. One of the things I did want to point out here is that in the skills-based routing assigned in queue, we're not able to adjust anything. So at a surface level, there's really not a lot of difference between skills-based routing assigned in queue and the longest available agent options. The only difference is, instead of just explicitly defining the agent name or using the team membership with the assigning skills to the queue, we have to explicitly assign the skills. If we use the variables, I saw an example of someone using variables to define the name of the queues, and I suddenly got really nervous, because if you're mixing these options, if you use the variable queue names, then it has to give you the skill relaxation. What I haven't tested is what happens if you put skill relaxation in your queue configurations, but your queue is the longest available agent queue. I'm not sure what's going to happen. So that's why I get a little nervous with using variable queue names, unless you know you're always using the skills-based routing with assign in the queue, in the flows, or you're never using skills-based routing assigned in the flows. If you're using some kind of mixture of queues, I get a little nervous about the idea of using variable queue names. Not going to say not to do it, it's just a little concern. Okay, so follow up here on the disconnect for errors or skills queue. Why would we do that disconnect? And here's the point I wanted to get across. One of the things I think is interesting about Webex Contact Center is the fact that when I configure an agent, I can assign them to multiple teams. And then the agents can then pick which team they're a member of at any given time, which might be a good idea in a contact center, might not be. That's a different question. But I find it interesting that agents can change their selection or their team membership throughout the course of their shift, as long as we administer it that way. Now, by default, if I log in as an agent and I'm a member of the sales team, the sales team has a skill profile assigned to it. In that case, what skills do I as an agent have while I'm in that sales team? Well, it's the profile assigned to the team. If I change my team membership to expert, then my skill profile changes based upon that membership. Here's a little thing to be aware of. When we use the skills-based routing for skill requirements, changing teams does not, whatever skill profile I have based upon my team membership, does not affect that skill requirements in the queue. The only thing that will affect that membership in the queue is the skill profile assigned directly to the agent. Now, I'm a big one for saying, if I don't have to assign a skill profile to an agent because I'm letting the team membership do it, then why do that? Why create multiple levels of administration? Because when you've got thousands and thousands of agents, trying to keep that track and keep that straight can be a challenge. So I like the idea of assigning a skill profile at the team level. However, if you start using these queues, this is the skills-based routing with the skills assignment, then you have to assign skills to the agents. And if there's no agents logged on that meets the skill requirements for that queue, once you put the contacts in the queue, you're not going to have agents to take that call. So that's why I put in my sample flow a disconnect after giving the caller an error message. And you could also consider alternate logic to that disconnect to handle this circumstance. And so this was one of the big things I wanted to point out. Just be careful with this type of configuration. It is, in my opinion, is somewhat different because this queue does not use the skills assigned to the teams. And therefore, what happens to the callers if there's no agents at all? So you can come in here and click View Assigned Agents. And the way I had this one configured, when I clicked View Assigned Agents, it told me there's no agents assigned that meets this combination of skills. So just wanted you to be aware of that. Good point. You must remember to enable the skill removal on the queue in the flow. Otherwise, any calls transfer between the queues will have the wrong skill in the destination queue. Great point. Thank you, Christopher. Okay, so I know this was really short and quick. Changes to contact center. I just did a quick overview. Probably spent a little more, too much time on that. The big one, in my opinion, is the one that happened about 2 weeks ago. Nice to know it's only in the gold tenants right now. So at least you're aware that that change is coming to your production tenant. The changes that went in effect back in April, where it's mostly, to me, the effect of the skills-based routing, but they did make some changes to longest available agent routing and how that affects what you're doing in your flows. And so, any questions? I just thought this was if you know me, if you worked with me before, then you probably know this is a valid statement. I've tried to catch the questions as we go. There's my email, mwilson@sunsetlearning.com. I always, whenever I'm teaching a class, I always caveat it as we don't have SLAs, which means no guarantees. It probably will not get a response in 4 hours or less. But, and if I'm teaching, it may take me a couple of days to get back with you. Poor Carol probably thinks I never respond to emails because she's been emailing me a lot in the last few weeks. She's just been so busy with other things that I'm like, I'll get to it. But
oh, good. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining today and teaching us and sharing your knowledge. I hope you all enjoyed the session. We hope to see you in our paid classes. Enjoy the promo code. This is valid until October 16. So thank you. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contacting us.
And if you have any specific requests on topics, feel free to send us that.
Yes.
Because otherwise it's a guess. I think people are interested in this.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, Mark.
Thanks, you too, Carol.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.